Hello, I'm Michaela Connor, co-founder and chairperson for Travel Daily's IWTA. And I'm lucky enough to host today's episode with the lovely Liz Ortiguera from PATA. Hi, Liz, how are you today?
Hi, Michaela.
Where are you at the moment? You're in Europe, do I hear?
I'm in Europe. I'm on personal leave this week, and I'm in Portugal for the first time, attending a school reunion, a Stanford reunion, and also getting in touch with my heritage. I'm actually a mix of East and West cultures. My heritage is Filipina, but I'm from the US. But even in that Filipino mix is Portuguese, Spanish, and Chinese.
Well, what an amazing country to explore that ancestry right now. And thank you for taking time to tell us your story whilst you're on personal leave as well. Really appreciate it. Looking at your background, it hasn't always been the travel industry or the tourist industry. Tell us a little bit about how you got to now be CEO of PATA.
Well, I took a very indirect path. I've had a few different careers in my lifetime. And I started off as a scientist. I did pharma R&D in the beginning. I was a chemical engineer and chemist. And then I decided I wanted to work with people more than molecules. So I went to business school and I moved to Asia about 23 years ago. And I joined American Express. And I was with the company for about 18 years. And 10 of those years I was doing travel. I was managing the travel network of partners across Asia Pacific. So that was kind of a precursor to what I'm doing now at PATA. And then when I left Amex, I wanted to get into innovation. I worked with startups for about 4 years, including EdTech or education technology. So while I took a very unique path, I'd say, suited my journey at different stages of my career. And I think all of those experiences have really informed and advised me on how to approach this job and the opportunities that we have in travel today.
And why did you decide to join PATA?
I love the mission. I really believe in travel as a force for good. And it's such a great, it's a mega sector consisting of many industries, and particularly covering Asia Pacific, which is really the engine for growth for the future of travel and the diversity of the cultures. So there's so many elements about it. First and foremost, I really embraced the mission of responsible travel and tourism development. And there's so much that you can do in that realm, whether it's advocating for sustainability, for financial inclusion and jobs creation, or even just, advocating for, the authenticity of great travel as a means for personal development and cultural insights for people. There's so many different elements of that. And so for me, that was fascinating about the role.
What's the biggest challenge of responsible tourists today?
Oh, I think, well, first and foremost is that we're really keen to get jobs up and running again. So many people were negatively impacted with the crisis over the last 2 or 3 years, and our industry most of all. So I think that's one. And the second is restarting it in a way that's sustainable and healthy. I think that consumers around the world, but most particularly in Asia, acutely feel the need to restart with sustainable travel and do it in a more responsible way, because we want to avoid, we've seen the impact of climate change already, and I think people very much appreciated when things did slow down during the pandemic. Their communities and their environment were restored to a more natural state. So I think the challenge for us is to restart everything, get people employed again, and the economic growth, but do it in a way that's really healthy and authentic to the communities.
How do you best influence businesses and enterprises in the tourist sector to be responsible?
Well, I think it's there are a lot of best practices. So I view that as part of PATA's mission, is to identify the best practices that are being done. And there are many people that have been studying this for decades. And it's not an easy challenge to couple profitability with purpose and social good. but the best practices are out there. And the beauty of PATA is that we've got this great public and private network where, I call it a network of networks. And so it's our platform to basically highlight the great learnings and the best practices that are being done. That's an important responsibility that we hold, in being this nonprofit members association that covers really the broad industry across Asia Pac.
I can hear you're really passionate about this. What is some of the biggest challenges that women face in the tourist sector at the moment?
I think, well, first and foremost, and I'm a big believer in mentoring women and creating, circles or networks where they can support each other. I think very often the biggest challenge that women face is themselves. And, there are too many women that have imposter syndrome, or they don't have enough self-belief. And I'm not sure why that is. I think that, very often women try to, feel 120% qualified before they try to bid on a job. I think that, whereas, men might do the opposite. They'll look at 60% of the task at hand and feel that they're qualified, and they'll go for it. And that's what everyone should do. They should reach as high as they can and not be self-defeating. So I think believing in yourself is one thing. I think that there certainly is bias. I remember during my first career, I heard the feedback that they didn't feel, this is in my entry-level scientist role. Indirectly, I got the feedback that I wouldn't get promoted because my voice was too feminine. And that's interesting feedback, because I don't know what I'm supposed to do with that. But, and I think back and now I realize, well, now I have a quite strong voice across the industry. So that wasn't as limiting as that particular person marked me with, right? And so I think that you will get bias like that. Very often I will be the only woman in the room, but, I'm confident that we can make a change, and we need to forge that path so that it is easier for, women colleagues and more junior women to follow that path. And then I think that more and more workplaces are realizing that with a more diverse management team, you'll get smarter decisions, you'll get better rounded products, you'll get more profitable outcomes, when you've got that diversity and inclusion. And so I think it's up to us to really forge that path.
I agree, Liz. I agree. It's very inspiring to hear you speak. So you talked about, in your scientist day, the feedback that you got, which made me laugh. It's a very strange thing to say to someone. And luckily you didn't listen to that. How do you think women can get a seat at the table? What did you do to get a seat at that table to ensure that you were being heard?
I think that, women are known to try harder, or put a lot of effort in. I think that, some very famous women, like Madeleine Albright, and have spoken about that, so I think it is important to put your best effort forward, but also have enough confidence in knowing that, you're ready to enter the room, and you do deserve the seat at the table. And I do appreciate, for example, I'm the first female CEO that PATA has had in its 71-year history, and I'm also only the second Asian. So I think that, there are people that are progressive and ready to open the door to a more diverse set of leaders. And I think that you just need to find and align with those good colleagues.
So if someone came to you and they felt like, they're getting some biased feedback, they're struggling to get a seat at that table or struggling to be heard, what advice would you give them?
I think it would be a few things. I would say that, it could be, first make the most of the current situation and consider, could it be the way you're communicating? And I don't advocate that women communicate like men. I think that women can have their unique strengths and be themselves. But it could also be, a cultural mismatch of where you are. And, if it is, but, but if you have made those attempts and you're staying authentic to yourself and your mission and the objectives of what you're there to do, and if that's still not working, then maybe it's not the right environment. And maybe you need to move on to a place that is more receptive and can align, with the value that you can deliver. And I think that, so it's a judgment call on, how much to keep pushing in a particular environment. And, but it's important to stay in an environment where you're able to be your best self.
I love hearing you speak about finding that environment where you're valued for who you are and where people do listen to you. What values or core values have you got that you live by today that might have helped guide you to find those workplaces where you feel like you could be yourself and you could be valued and you were heard?
I think one, for example, is teamwork, mutual respect, business with integrity. If you take care of the customers or the members, then the profits will follow. That was a mantra that I got from the pharma company. I worked at Merck for my first career. And then when I was at American Express, it was very much about teamwork, collaboration, mutual respect. And, we talked about the fact that, those were called blue box values. I think that if you're in an organization that has values that match your own, that can be just as important as salary. I had colleagues that said, oh, I could leave this company and make more money, but I'm happy here because, it's an environment with shared values. So I think that that's really important. And, so I think, those positive lessons that you learn along the way from, the people and the cultures that you interact with, you need to carry them with you and bring them to whatever organization you're, in charge of. I think that's very important.
And what values have PATA got that you're aligned with? What was it about PATA that you felt like, yeah, this is a place for me?
I think first and foremost, that term responsible development of travel and tourism, it's so all encompassing. It can be defined in many different ways. And I think, that was the beauty of it, is that I could see the multiple dimensions behind that, whether it's sustainability, whether it's diversity, inclusion, whether it's financial inclusion, reinforcement of cultural heritage. There are just so many dimensions to that I felt were so important to reinforce and define.
When we were chatting earlier on, you mentioned that you're really passionate about women empowerment, especially that in the tourist industry, once you get up to the senior leadership roles and above, the percentage of women is very small.
Yeah.
How can we change that?
Well, I have to credit one initiative that came from my team members, and it was for International Women's Day. And they wanted, they came to me with a promotion that involved, approaching different women leaders in our industry and in our region to do mini interviews. And one thing I felt was quite important is that I wanted to search hard sometimes and identify women leaders who basically looked like the young women of the nation they represented. And so, I had women leaders from, from Saudi Arabia, from Malaysia, Japan, Sri Lanka. And I wanted young women to see women that looked like them, because I came to appreciate that that's such a rare thing in our industry, that it was important for them to relate to that and someone that they could aspire to be. And I think that was very important.
How successful were those interviews?
Well, no, I was so pleased because all these super busy executive women, when they were invited, 100% of them said yes. And they were keen to do it. And I think that, that's very telling about the dynamic among women leaders. When I was young, I mentioned to you before we started this interview, when I was young, it was very common for women leaders to be tougher on their direct reports. And they were harsher. And we don't know why. But I think that, that culture changed. Women really need to support other women. And I think that it's really a big change for the good.
Amazing idea. I can't wait to see what you're going to come up with in the next International Women's Day. You also talked about finding a mentor before, and how that has, helped you in your career, can help others in their career as well. What has been the most important mentor throughout your career that's helped you kind of get to where you are today?
Oh gosh. Yeah, I remember someone said to me when I was in business school, they said, your mentor, you don't find your mentor finds you. And I think that's really interesting. I think that sometimes it's multiple people. It can be, there are always, if you reflect back on your career, and I can do this now, and you think about people that were maybe not formal mentors, but they actually made a significant difference in your career. I had one friend who inspired me to go to Stanford Executive later in my career. I had another friend who inspired me to bid on a job. So it can be different supporters or mentors through the course of your career. And maybe when I was a child, someone asked me the other day, it was a fun question. I was sitting with a group of men and women in our industry in the Philippines, and the women were all talking about how when we were young, we were inspired to be flight attendants. And so one of them said to me, well, how did you go from wishing to be a flight attendant to heading up PATA? And so it was an interesting question. And I just thought, it just kind of evolved over time. And I think it was really about work at something that inspires you, that you want to put your energy into, and and aligns with your values, like I mentioned. And so if you do that, you don't know what path it'll take you. And I remember my father once said, whatever you do in your career, just make sure you do it really well. And, you do it to the best of your abilities, and you try the hardest and you work the hardest that you can. And so, that was, to me, at the time, it seemed a little vague because he wasn't giving me guidance on what to go into. But I think the advice has held so true. And it was so, I had that freedom to go and do whatever I wanted to do. So I really appreciated that.
That's great advice. Very good advice. Finally, what's your recipe for success? If you could narrow it down in 5 words or less, what's your recipe?
Values, commitment, effort, insight, and inspiration. I think those are all the elements.
Amazing. We didn't even practice that one. That was just like that. Wow, amazing. Thank you so much, Liz, for your time today. It's been truly inspirational to hear you share about your background and what you think is important. I've taken away so many things from this interview, and I know many women and men listening to this will too. So thank you so much for taking your time, and enjoy the rest of your time in Portugal.
Thank you. And well, thank you for your focus on this particular topic. I know it's going to do great good for our industry. It's such an important thing that we need to do to support women.
Agree. My pleasure. My pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.